A busy show here on the Locked On Sabres podcast as the whole hockey world seems to be trying to figure out how in the world there's a 14-year playoff drought occurring in the National Hockey League. From John Buccigross to Elliotte Friedman to former Sabre players, Brandon Montour, and former team employees, agents. Friday has become, let's figure out what's happening in Buffalo. I got thoughts on that. Updates on Dahlin, a lot to get to here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Stay tuned.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Thanks for listening to this Friday edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast, and thanks for making us your first listen every day. Of course, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey. Doesn't matter. We're free for you, and that also includes checking us out on our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe the show there. You also can hit us up on our Locked On Sabres text club. Join subtext.com/Locked On Sabres. That one is not free. That is the price of about a cup of coffee a month, for instance. But if you want to get a thought in, you want updates on injuries, lines, game updates, hit us up there. Again, join subtext.com/Locked On Sabres. Today's episode of the podcast is presented by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your $5 bet wins. Great time for that because, college hoops right now, ongoing and everything, golf, and of course, hockey. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Friday edition of the show. It is warm here in Buffalo, and that would usually in other markets, I think, not have you thinking about hockey, but every year, the first great weather day of the year, when it's 65 or more and it's sunny out, that's what we got today in Buffalo, even up to 71 is actually the high today. And my mind goes to the Sabres. And because it reminds me of, okay, spring and the weather's nice, party in the plaza. That's what I think of. I think of being a kid and wearing shorts to the arena in meaningful games and, the party in the plaza ahead of playoff games down there, where you're wearing the jersey and shorts and you still care about the results of the game. So they're on my mind a lot today. And coincidentally, as I just kind of mentioned in the tease, everybody seems to be getting in on the Sabres today. Everybody. So there's a lot of juicy stuff. We'll parse through it. And I think you're seeing a lot of takes from former players and agents and juicy details from Elliotte Friedman that kind of help us put this whole thing into perspective and how it's viewed around the league, the historic nature of what has happened here in Buffalo, a drought that the league has never seen, different than the Bills drought. The Bills drought had been seen in the NFL. That was not the record. In fact, I think the Cardinals had a drought 5 or 6 years longer than the Bills. There were other teams that had droughts that long. It's just football. You cannot have as much parity, quarterbacks and whatnot. But here in this sport, it's all about parity. It's all about turning things around quickly, have the ability to do that. And this team has somehow managed to go 4 years now over the NHL record, right? Like 20, 30% above the record already. And why is that happening? And it feels like everybody is dumbfounded by it. And they're trying to figure it out. And I think you got a lot of stuff that we can throw into the pile and try to put the puzzle together as best we can, as really we've been doing here day to day forever, for the entire length of this thing. So we'll get to that coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We will get to Sabres and Golden Knights at the end of today's show, because that's actually kind of a coincidence. It's part of it. And maybe that's why some of these people are picking up on this story on Friday, because Jack Eichel's in town. And it's a 12:30 game, and the Sabres are, I think it's a national TV game. Let me double check that. It is, no, ESPN Plus. So not really, but Eichel in town has maybe fueled this a little bit too. I want to get to what we expect tomorrow. I don't know what the crowd reaction is going to be like, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. Not to say like he's going to get cheered. I do not expect that. So anyways, that's coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Before we get to any of that, one injury update and then more juicy stuff on Dahlin. The injury update is not a good one, and it actually is about as bad. It's the worst injury update you could possibly ask for right now, given who the player is. The Sabres just training for Josh Norris last week, and the number one concern was, can he stay healthy? And exactly 1 week later, there's the update that he's not on the ice today at practice. He has an undisclosed injury. He is meeting with the Sabres medical staff and team doctors, and it's something he's been dealing with, according to Lindy Ruff. He didn't say what it was. The fact, though, that he put the label of something he's been dealing with on that injury makes me think that it's the shoulder that has been bothering him throughout his career, that he's had multiple surgeries on. But that's a guess. We don't actually know. So, woof, right? The fact that that's happened already, and you hope it's nothing major and that they can get him healthy, because that's the risk, and you don't want to see that already starting to go up in smoke. Because I've liked the player. I've liked the play that he's had on the ice, so do not want to see that at all. Now, to get to the Dahlin thing, because that actually is kind of a part of everything we'll talk about today and everybody's been talking about, because Dahlin is kind of seen as the next guy that might want out and would obviously be expected to go thrive somewhere else because he's an amazing player. And the jokes are probably already being made. The Photoshop's made up of, oh, here's Dahlin holding up the cup in Edmonton or whatever. Just, it's how it goes. Elliotte Friedman kind of confirming that Paul Bissonnette didn't make up the rumor. And I never believed he made it up. I thought that it was possible he misheard something, or maybe something was lost in translation, or just like when you're playing phone tag and one person tells somebody something and then that person tells the other person something and that person tells a fourth guy something. And between what the first guy said and the fourth guy said, you have a couple of words maybe that have changed, and that could change meaning, and that could, that could inflame something like this that maybe wasn't as big of a deal. So Friedman is the guy we need for this, right? Elliotte Friedman is the guy that we need to come out and tell us what's going on. He's the number one insider in the sport. And to my surprise, not actually that surprising, I mean, Bissonnette said that he got it from an insider. He didn't say he heard it from a player. He said, insiders have told me. So Friedman being one of those insiders, not a surprise. Friedman says on 32 Thoughts today about that situation, this was kind of my fault. And he said he didn't want to get into it more than that, but he said, quote, this was kind of my fault, which to me means clearly he's the one who talked to Paul Bissonnette. He's the one who told Paul Bissonnette something to the effect of Dahlin in that meeting. Again, this is where, did Bissonnette mishear him, or did he add a word that maybe he thought wasn't a big deal and then it was a big deal? That's where you start to get into the gray area of it. But either way, we now pretty much know that where Bissonnette got his rumor from was Friedman, but it probably wasn't the exact same thing that Friedman told him. That's what I think probably happened, almost undoubtedly happened, given the way he talked today. So there's that part of it. And Friedman goes into the meeting a little bit more and says he's been very careful about his wording, which I gotta say, the more careful he was about talking about this, the more I kind of wanted to believe that it's true, that Dahlin did say something to the effect of, I'm not staying here forever. I'm not signing up for another rebuild. And that is really the point that I want to get to about today's show, on the Dahlin part at least. Friedman says, quote, he requested the meeting and he just wanted to know what's our direction. Okay? Let's start there. He just wanted to know what's our direction. To me, this is where it's kind of comparable to Eichel. When did Eichel first say he wanted out? It wasn't, I want out. It's, I want out if we're going to rebuild again. I don't want to go through another rebuild, was the original story from Eichel on that meeting he had with the Sabres, is that it wasn't I want out of Buffalo, it's I want out of Buffalo if we're about to rebuild again. And I almost wonder if Dahlin went in with very similar motivation to that quote right there. He just wanted to know what's our direction. Does he want to make sure we're not going into a rebuild? Ensure that we're going to try to win next year. We're going to try to win the year after that, that we're not going to tear it down to the studs. That's kind of how that sounded. Adds, Friedman does, quote, nobody wants to lose. I don't think any ultimatum was delivered. The Sabres know their guys aren't happy, the Sabres know their guys aren't going to be happy if they don't start turning things around. That's kind of, again, here's Friedman saying, all right, even if he didn't request an ultimatum, which he says, I don't think any ultimatum was delivered, he makes sure you know, nobody wants to lose. And even the Sabres know that their guys won't be happy if things don't get turned around. That's the same thing. In essence, it's basically the same thing as Dahlin saying. It's just different people. It's just whether it was said out loud or not is the only difference. Whereas, all right, Dahlin doesn't clearly need to tell them, right? The Sabres know he's going to be mad and not want to go through a rebuild if they lose the next 2 years, for instance. They don't have to guess at that. They wouldn't be put off, or well, maybe they'd be put off, but they wouldn't be surprised or stunned for Dahlin to say, okay, this is year 9 now, still not happening. Oh, we're about to rebuild? Yeah, I want out. He doesn't need to say that out loud. He does add, Dahlin was satisfied with what he heard. Okay, so that's good, right? That is, I'm sure Adams giving him a blueprint of what he wants to do this offseason, and that would obviously feature getting more wins next year and not going younger or pick some prospects. So Dahlin's satisfied with what he heard. And this is also a juicy part of this and an important part of this. My original take on this, before we even knew that Dahlin didn't say exactly, I want out if we don't start winning. My original thought on that, my instinct, my gut said, I love that, because to me, that does show leadership. That shows leadership on the player level, that when you're putting in 110%, and Dahlin does, I'm not saying every single player does, but Dahlin does, and you need to hold your organization to the exact same standard. And that's a question about ownership right now when it comes to internal cap and resources around the team and whatever. You got to hold them to the same standard that you hold yourself to. That's leadership. And the Sabre players seem to agree, because Friedman said that the room loved that Dahlin went upstairs, that they fully supported him doing it. And wouldn't you? If you're Tage Thompson, or you are, I don't know, who's another guy Alex Tuck. He's a good one for this, right? Alex Tuck. These guys are frustrated. They perform. They want to win. They're frustrated. Maybe they have questions about what's happening upstairs. So what do you want to happen? Well, Ras, you're the captain. They want to see their captain go up and get those answers. They don't want to have to do it. They're not wearing the C. They want their captain to lead and to go get those answers and to ensure that they're going to get all the resources and all the help that they need to win. And Dahlin did it. To me, that's being a captain. That's being a good captain. So I'm glad to see that the room agreed with that. So all in all, I think we kind of came away with pretty good details from Friedman on this whole thing. We can kind of put it to bed. I think right now, I don't think it was right, though, to just shove the whole story into a landfill. I do think meaningful things came out of this. The Sabres knowing that they're not dumb. They went through this. They knew they've been through it with Eichel. They've been through it with Reinhart. They now know, hey, if we don't win, our star players are going to want out. I don't need them to say it. I know it's true. And maybe that's a little confirmation the Sabres know that there's a clock here and they got to get going. They got to win right now. All right. When we come back, let's change gears a little bit, but not too much, from what's happening here to a pretty damning, or very interesting at least, article from ESPN.com today. Ryan S. Clark spoke to a bunch of former Sabre players, One of them is on record, Brandon Montour, former Sabres team employee, scouts in the NHL, and got all of their takes on what's happening here that has a 14-year playoff drought existing in the NHL. A lot of stuff to take away from that piece when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by Trade Coffee. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. I mean, I'm starting my days off at 4:45 in the morning, so hugely important. I got to have it. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. So that's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. International, of course, too. I've got some from Ethiopia that I've been drinking in the last week. That's really good. Cool packaging, too. It's like a cat in space, like cat astronaut on it. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. First bag that I had was a game changer, had such a smooth, rich flavor, could actually taste the difference. And if you don't love your first bag, no worries, because Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. They'll trade one for the other. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order. All you got to do is go to drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first offer. Again, at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres also presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories. If you want to bet on Ovechkin and his goal chase, if you want to go for the golf tournaments that are happening right now as we get into the big part of their calendar, you can check it all out. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app, super simple to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. It's immediate right in there. So visit FanDuel.com. Get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Again, at FanDuel.com. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Kind of a State of the Sabres episode today. Game tomorrow. But everybody's talking about the State of the Sabres. So obviously I want to get in on it. And especially when we have all these different perspectives that we don't typically have, right? Like it's interesting to see what other people think. And especially to me, it is interesting to hear what people that have been here and have left currently think. Honestly, because I think those individuals are important to figure out the story of what goes wrong here. Because you're not going to get, if there are problems in the organization, you're not going to get it from the guys in the room right now. They can't really, right? Like they don't want to risk, problems at work or, getting ousted, whatever. They don't want that. But if you've been there and now you're gone and now it's kind of ancient history, you can only speak to what it used to be. But, there are a lot of things might be exactly the same as when that player was here, when Brandon Montour was here. It was only a couple of years ago. It's not like we're talking about 15 years ago. So, and Montour is one of the people that did speak in this piece. Ryan S. Clark, it's a must read. If you're a Sabre fan and you really are, digging in on what's going wrong here and you want to know, Ryan S. Clark wrote it this morning, and not everything in there is perfect. I actually disagree with one main point of the story, one of many, which was spoken on by former Sabre players. Montour spoke on this, and a former Sabre team employee did too, of the idea that, part of the problem is that the Sabres just keep moving on from people, that there's constant change and they're always firing. And I just do not think that's true. I think that is that's over talked about. The Sabres and Pegula being trigger happy. If anything, to me, at times it has been the opposite. I mean, current general manager Kevyn Adams has been general manager longer than 19 other teams' GMs. He's not, the third shortest tenure GM in the league and we're trying to run him out of town. No, he's the 19th longest tenured GM in the NHL. So he's been around and he's still here. And I thought they waited way too long to fire Ralph Kruger because they just didn't want to make changes all the time. Boccigross went for 3 years. Okay, you think he should have got an extra year? I think it's a bad point to say, well, I just want to keep somebody for the sake of keeping somebody. That's dumb. If you know the person's not good at the job, don't wait 3 years just because you don't want to be seen as, oh, I got to change things all the time. If the guy stinks at his job, get him out as quickly as you know that that's true. And I know the point is sometimes you don't know and you got to give him a chance. But to me, especially Boccigross, some of those situations are so clear. We knew Kruger stunk. There was no reason to wait around. Boccigross, I would have been more open to letting him hang around if he had made moves. But he didn't. He took Tim Murray's roster and he watched it for 3 years. He made his draft picks and he made some nice draft picks. And sure, that could have made a difference. But the guy refused to change the core from before, at least in a large sample. He didn't want to change. He didn't want to make changes to the roster. And that's what you're supposed to do as a GM. So I don't agree with that point. A lot of other good stuff, though. I got a bunch of quotes that I really want to go through here and kind of break them down one by one. And let's start with a Brandon Montour quote. I've referenced that he's one of the former players that spoke. He's the only one that was on record, though, like willing to say that it was him. So Montour says, I always tell people, if you can figure out a way to win in Buffalo, it's a pretty damn good place to play, is what Montour said. And that, I'm sure, was a question about why does nobody want to go there? And it's kind of the opposite of palm trees in Texas, right? That's a factor. But even what Montour is saying here is, if he's telling the truth, and I would believe him, that if somebody comes to him, maybe Josh Norris, for instance, I don't know if they know each other, but if he had called Montour and said, okay, what do you think? And Montour sounds like somebody that's not telling him, buddy, man, you're in for trouble. Then, the weather is cold and they tax the you-know-what out of you. What Montour is basically saying is, no, it's just the winning. That it is a good place to play, but you got to have the winning. You got to have the winning, and then it's good. But without it, you've got nothing. But he's kind of saying it's not palm trees and taxes, is what Montour is saying there. So there's one quote for you. Another one from a former team employee. This could be anybody, right? This could be a former GM. This could be a former scout. It could be literally anybody. Coach, he says, quote, that's where I ask. They're talking about now all the former players that have gone on and had success. Eichel, Reinhart, Linus Ullmark winning the Vezina, Montour. I mean, there's the list go O'Reilly. The list goes on and on. So on that, this team employee says, that's where I ask, did some of those guys really get better when they left? Or were they already on that trajectory and another team saw the benefit? That should be indisputable, right? The culture matters, and that's another thing to get to here. But I think that's accurate, that you had a lot of guys that weren't yet in the primes of their careers. I think it's especially true of Eichel, Reinhart, and Ullmark. I think those guys were just entering the peaks of their careers when they were moved. So it's natural that they would have been better when they went to their next landing spot. If you want to talk about O'Reilly or Kane, if you want, for this, less so him, but then, okay, that's a little different because they were more established. They were more veteran players at that point. Another quote. This one is from a former agent. There were a couple of former agents that spoke. Says people get so caught up in looking at how it's going for the Sabres and then looking at other players that might have been there. This is a former player. This is a former Sabres player, unnamed. And on those former players going elsewhere, this guy says, they think, oh, he's playing better hockey. Well, he's part of a team that's playing really good hockey, talking about the culture and how these players go to winning culture. And that's when you are seeing a big step forward. And that's, again, something that we know and we accept and we say, I think a lot is, sure, maybe they got a little bit better, but they look a lot better when they're playing in that environment where they've already got it figured out. Talking about how Vegas already had cup-winning types of culture. They hadn't won it yet, but they'd been to the finals. Marcia Show and Carlson and Theodore and Riley Smith and Mark Stone, like that, those guys had it. Reinhardt goes to a proven winner with a culture. Ullmark goes to a proven winner with a culture in Boston. So that's a good point. And I think it's kind of obvious, but you hear it there from a former player. That's what they think of the difference. Now this is the one from the agent. I got a hot take on agents in a second, in a good way. This is now on the Sabres missing the playoffs by one game, and this is more a criticism of Kevyn Adams, I think, from an agent. Quote, speaking about last year, Clifton and Johnson, remember the Sabres signed Connor Clifton, Eric Johnson. They missed by 1 point, veteran D. Clifton and Johnson are fine players, but were those the moves you needed to take a team that missed by one game to a contender level? The agent asked. I've seen Sabres GM Kevyn Adams talk about taxes and palm trees. I'm sure it is not the same in Buffalo as it is in Florida, but this is also a team that has basically spent at the cap floor for the last couple of years. When you are that close to making the playoffs, you can go out and overspend for the right person. And that is something that I've been saying for years. Jeremy's saying it on WGR. A lot of people, most people that cover the Sabres will say this. You aren't taking your full swing, right? You missed by 1 point, and you didn't go get better players than Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson when you had all that cap space. I said this about Ullmark on Twitter the other day, that I said it on this podcast 4 years ago. They were $16 million below the cap floor going into when Linus Ullmark signed with the Boston Bruins 3 years ago. $16 million below the cap floor. And I said, oh, pay him whatever you want. 7, 8 million. I don't care. Pay him whatever he wants because you're going to be well below the cap floor anyway. And he's young. He was young at the time. He's still young. He's not 30 yet. Or maybe he just turned 30. Pay him. Who cares? And you know what they ended up doing? They ended up spending money anyway, but they gave it to Ben Bishop, who was retired. They spent it anyway on a goalie. The cap space, at least, not the salary. And I know that's the point here, right? They didn't want to spend the salary, and they needed to spend the cap space. So they instead paid Ben Bishop a cap hit to not play for them. So damning indictment by that agent. The agent speaking into existence. And these are really the main points. Nothing here is surprising, but it is nice to see, or it is confirmation that this is how the league thinks of them. I've got a former player telling you it's not the players getting better, it's the culture that they're going to. I've got a former team employee saying when they did start winning, they were entering the primes of their careers. The trajectory was that things were going to eventually work out. I've got Brandon Montour saying it's not taxes and palm trees, it's just the winning. And I've got an agent saying, yeah, internal cap matters. Internal cap matters to why they don't win, why they didn't make it last year, especially. All of this is evidence that we can continue to pour into why this team is on a 14-year playoff drought. The agent take I want to get to real quick before we get to Vegas with Eichel in town tomorrow. Hot take. What about an agent running the Buffalo Sabres? There's one you haven't maybe heard before. What about hiring maybe this guy? This guy that Ryan S. Clark is talking to in this ESPN article. Hire him. Hire an agent to be the Buffalo Sabres general manager. And if that sounds like a foreign concept to you, I don't believe it's happened in the NHL. It happens in the NBA. There have been, to my knowledge, I looked this up, I found 5 NBA GMs that were agents. Agent turned GM. The Knicks hiring Leon Rose is one famous one. The Lakers hiring Rob Pelinka to run their team as the GM. He was an agent. Before that, the Warriors GM, the mastermind of the Golden State Warriors throughout their dynasty, was Bob Myers, who was an agent. There is a difference in the NBA that I'll admit up front here, but it is the thing that kind of intrigues me about it. In the NBA, it's all about just star players. Get the star players to come there, and you're going to be good. So in the NBA, the priority is on player relationships and convincing players to come here. And who better than the very people that go out on a day-to-day basis and camp. They know what players want because they're fighting for what players want on a day-to-day basis. So they know what the players want, and they already have prior relationships with a million people around the league. Doesn't that kind of sound like what the Sabres need? The Sabres, if one of their problems, one of them, is convincing players to come here, and one of the struggles is, well, you don't win. Montour says, for instance, like indicates, the winning is one of the reasons. Well, I can't fix that right now. But what can I do? I can try to make everything outside of winning perfect. Everything I can get whether it is facilities, whether it is treatment of players, whether it is resources, that a lot of does stem from ownership, but give me a guy that has relationships with a lot of players, knows what makes them tick, knows exactly what they're looking for. Let me hire an agent as the Buffalo Sabres general manager. Would the agent really be less qualified to run the team compared to when Kevyn Adams was hired as the Sabres GM? How bad could it possibly go? I mean, rock bottom has been here for years. So it's a different type of thought process. It's a different type of path. And it's one that I wonder if we ever get there in the NHL. We have got there in the NBA. Maybe the Sabres would be one of the first teams through the door. Maybe Florida, by the way, has done it. I thought I saw reference to maybe the Panthers had, but doesn't matter. The agent idea, I don't think it's going to happen, but just something I thought I'd toss out there because I thought it was interesting. All right, when we come back, Eichel's in town. Jack Eichel and the Golden Knights. What should we expect the fan reaction to be? How much energy energy is there going to be towards Eichel left to give in this game? Get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres presented by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, hey, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's really easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you just stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner, even smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's right, you get half off. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for 50% off your first year. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Jack Eichel and the Golden Knights are in town, 12:30 against the Sabres on Saturday at KeyBank Center. By the way, Jacob Bernard Docker, third pair defenseman that the Sabres picked up from the Ottawa Senators in the Josh Norris trade, was practicing on Friday. I think he's going to play over Connor Clifton, but we will see if he makes his Sabre debut wearing number 24 on Saturday. Eichel is in town. Kind of funny coincidence, maybe not a coincidence, that we are talking about all of this with Eichel in town, right? He's the catalyst, I think, for a lot of these stories probably that are written today. So Eichel in town. The last time Eichel played against the Sabres in Buffalo, he didn't play last year. It's been a minute, 2 years. And the last time he played here was the game where he scored a hat trick. He's been back here twice. Sabre fans won round one, and Eichel won round two. You know, put his arms out like, oh, where are you guys? Where are the boos now? He did that, and he got the empty netter at the end. He was super fired up, whatever. And then he won the cup. And that's where I wonder how much energy is there going to be for booing him this time. In the first two meetings, every time he touched the puck, everybody in the building booed him. Everybody got on him. He missed a breakaway in the second period the last time they played him, and everybody was all over him. But since then, he's scored a hat trick in your building, and he's won the cup. And maybe it feels like you can't win, right? You can't get in his head. You got in his head the first time, and that was funny, and it was great at the time. But you're not really going to do that anymore. What's he going to do? You really want to stoke the flames and get him to point to his ring finger? No, nobody wants that in the arena. So I think there'll be some boos, of course, but I just don't know if we should expect the same level of energy. The other difference is that it was going better. Vibes were a lot better the last time the Sabres would have played Eichel in these circumstances. The first time Eichel comes back, the Sabres are not going to make the playoffs, but they weren't expected to. They were just coming up in their second rebuild here, third rebuild of the drought, whatever it was. And Eichel comes back and they win the game, and we didn't care as much if they made the playoffs that year. So vibes were good. They were building up still. The next year, when Eichel comes back to town and he beats the Buffalo Sabres, it's very early in the year. The Sabres were 7-6 going into that hockey game. So 7-6, it's in November, season's not over. You're not as mad at the organization. You're not as mad at the team. So again, you're not in as dark of a place with the franchise. You got more leftover energy to pour towards booing Eichel. In this game, everyone's mad at the team. Everyone's mad at the organization. Everyone's mad at Kevyn Adams. I don't know if there's enough negative energy left over to send towards Eichel, send Eichel's way. So I don't know what we're going to get. I bet it's going to be less hateful than the first two meetings. I'm not saying he's going to get cheered or anything by any means, but I think it'll be a little more of a non-event than it was in the first two meetings, Eichel back in Buffalo. Victor Olofsson also making his return to Buffalo, and he will be playing on the top line. He has been recently with Eichel and Mark Stone. He's having a little bit of a strange year. He was a part of an article that Matt Larkin of the Daily Faceoff wrote the other day of underrated defensive players on the season. And Olofsson weirdly has great defensive results, numbers-wise. I'm here to tell you, though, without watching all of their games, that 100% has to be because he plays with Eichel and Stone, who are both great defensive players. Has to be. Has to be why. There's nothing we saw from Victor Olofsson in 5 years that would have told you that there's a good defensive player in there. But maybe. So we'll see. He's on the top line, and on the year, he has 11 goals and 11 assists. Doesn't sound like much. He's played 43 games. So, you're talking about like a 20-goal pace for Olofsson on the year. So it's not like he's been unbelievable. He's been a lot better than last year, but still not like he's been unbelievable. So Olofsson back in town. I would expect he gets a tribute video, right? He was here for 6 years, actually. 314 games. I think I'd want to bet that Olofsson gets a tribute video. Yeah, I'll bet yes on that. Anyway, Sabres are big underdogs. The game itself, not expecting to go well. They'll probably get beat. They'll probably get beat bad. Vegas coming off a shutout win over Columbus the other night. So there you go. Sabres and Golden Knights. State of the Sabres. Put a bow on it for today, for this week. And we'll see what next week will bring for us. Drama and rumors and probably more losses, but we'll see. We're rolling through getting this season to the garage here in mid-March. Wish it could be mid-April for that. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you're looking for more league-wide stories around the NHL, be sure to check out Locked On NHL from all the local guys across Locked On, chipping in, bringing the daily league-wide stories that matter. Check out Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll talk to you on Monday here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.